So Hebrews 11:1, you guys are talking about faith, and I wanted to
Yes.
say, just to defend against the notion of what I know a lot of Christendom or people in Christendom promote this idea that faith is supposed to be lacking in evidence. But, the scripture there, it says, faith is the assured expectation of what is hoped for, the evident demonstration. And there's a little mark there. It says, or convincing evidence of realities that are not seen. And I know that verse 3 talks about by faith, we perceive that system of things were put in order by God's word, which would be the logos, so that what is seen has come into existence from things that are not visible. I don't know if you guys find that inherently objectionable, but then I would say that the whole scripture there in Hebrews then ties in people of faith who actually spoke to God, or if you believe the narrative, obviously. So they, it wasn't a matter of having faith in God's existence or faith without evidence. They had faith that enacted them to do things. And they had the assured expectation that God would be with them. So I think that a lot of times people use this term of faith to denote a belief in something when in reality the Bible doesn't really a belief in the expectation, but not a belief in, some invisible God that
So
there's no reason
would you
to
say
believe in.
would would you say, John, that the version of faith that you're talking about is synonymous with trust?
That's an interesting word. I suppose, yeah, I
That's
could see that point.
that's just something a lot of theists, when they point to Hebrews 11, they want to say, well, this is meaning to say that the kind of faith that I mean is trust. And then what they're saying, they want to say that faith in Hebrews 11 is justified belief, right? It's not
Yeah.
unjustified belief. Would you agree that
Yeah.
there are other places in the Bible where one could where an honest believing Christian could interpret the way faith is used to mean belief in the absence of evidence? Would you believe that there are passages on either side of this question?
You know, I guess there could be. I mean, I've actually specifically been looking for some as it would relate
Well,
to the
can
idea of
I
having unjustified belief.
right, well, I just wanna ask, what did Jesus say about this particular topic? About needing evidence or having it or requiring evidence in order to believe in his sacrifice and to be a Christian? Can you think of any
He said,
scriptures?
yeah, he said, well, because he was providing evidence then, right? If you were sitting there in the crowds and assuming the narrative is true, he was sitting there, healing people, raising people from the dead. That was providing some sort of, for the day, somewhat empirical evidence of him being real. But he did say, happy are those that would, in fact, believe these things and not have to rely on these signs and miracles. Yep. He did say something to that
Right,
effect.
like Thomas, right?
What
Like the line you said to Thomas.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. I agree. Yep.
Okay, so, I mean, I'm just kinda I'm curious, like, because normally a lot of theists like to prioritize what Jesus supposedly actually said, about things. They normally prioritize that over, maybe some other things, that are part of the theology.
Mhm.
And so I'm just kinda curious as to how do you reconcile what Jesus says about needing evidence versus this claim, about Hebrews 1 stating that, well, faith is when you have evidence and you're convinced of it.
I think that, obviously I would say that, the Gospels and some of what Paul wrote was designed to supplement evidence that what Jesus did and recorded. And I know that's highly debatable. I'm understanding your point that you'd say, I'm sure that didn't happen and wasn't real. But I would say that the Gospels and the Bible, the Christian scriptures, were written in part to convey the history of what he did. And I would say that why those people would be happy is because there is a principle in the Bible related to the more that someone is given as far as evidence, the more is going to be expected of them in return. The less that's given to them, the less in return. And so the idea would be someone that might find faith and assured expectation of the things to come, have belief in God, though they don't have as strong a reasons, maybe even in those in the first century where Jesus was doing all these miracles, they would actually be judged to a lesser degree due to that. So in some sense, there's somewhat of an equitable exchange. That's what I would, that would take a longer explanation, more scriptures, but That
But even that,
that's important.
you're acknowledging that there's a Christian principle that says that people who believe with less evidence have some kind of advantage over people who require more evidence, right?
Well, I think it would
Even
be
by what
evidence
you
that
just
they
said.
would. Well, no, because they're then now I mean, it's a complicated theology, but I would say that now you're entering into a realm two where we have other evidences based on relationship with him. I'm not going to go into like people speak in tongues and
No, no,
fire and all that,
but
but
even no, but even
I
in
would say
principle,
there's a metaphysical side. There's a metaphysical
but
side
no,
to that
none of
that
that
starts to.
addresses. But sure, but you said to more who none of that is addressed in like to more who all that is encompassed in to more who's given more will be required, right? So all that
Mhm.
is encompassed in there.
Yeah. Mhm.
The principle, none of that changes the principle you were describing in that the people who were given less have more are better off than the people who are given more.
Okay. People who are given less are better off than the people
So
given more.
right, so that is that at least in principle sure sounds like uh lesser justified belief is valued.
I would say the bargain or exchange is less. How about that? And maybe I'm not wording that correctly. That's just kind of off the
Okay.
top
But
way to
can
say
you at
it.
least
But
then acknowledge that there's no universal way that this faith concept is being used in the Bible? I think we're where I was at least going with this was that definitely there are Christians who are using faith to mean trust, like you are. There are Christians who are using faith to mean literally blind faith, and they feel like that is a virtue. Just like William, the caller, was describing
I
the person who, the person who's talking to them said, well, at the end of the day, you just got to have faith. Evidence doesn't matter because we're not talking about evidence. In that context, the people William were talking to were using faith to mean a lack of justification, the gap between what I can justify and what I accept.
right. I guess I'm just trying to denote the difference between. I mean, it's not supposed to be completely evident or lacking complete evidence. There is supposed to be some evidence for the faith that you have, and I'm saying that
Well,
that evidence can come. Yeah, yeah. It's not
that's fine,
completely blind faith.
but there is, but there is a gap, right? There's a gap between what you would normally accept evidentially, and you're rewarded for closing that gap with faith.
Yeah, but I would say that
Okay, so
I mean, not to derail this, but I mean, I would say that atheists have a similar, like abiogenesis. There's a certain faith that in the future that gap will be
Mm,
closed. I mean, so you're right. I
no,
agree. I mean, as long
no,
as we say that
there's
both.
no faith. I don't I wouldn't describe it as faith, like the gaps that we have currently in our understanding of how life began on Earth. Like I wouldn't say that there's faith that they'll be filled in. I think that there's substantial evidence, like in the background of scientific research, that suggests that we will in the future, like understand it. Like there have been times when we didn't understand some natural process, and we slowly learned more and more and more. And so, like it's proven through evidence that that does actually happen. So there's no, I don't know. Maybe Paul disagrees with me. I just don't
well,
see a
I
faith
yeah,
component in that.
I guess for
Oh,
me, when it comes to abiogenesis, I don't think it requires faith to acknowledge that at one point there was no life on the earth, and that now there is life on the earth. Right? Like those are not. That's not a faith position. I don't think. You would agree at one point there was no life on the earth. So so
yeah,
then
but
the question is,
mhm.
then the question is, do we have reasonable belief? Right. So right now we couldn't describe abiogenesis in a way that like we can recreate it in the lab, whatever. I don't need to have any faith in anything that maybe we will never solve it. Like that's obviously it's a historical thing, and it was a single time event. Even if we could do it in a lab, that wouldn't prove that that's how it happened the first time. Even if we could do it in a lab every single day, we couldn't prove like because it's a historical thing.
Mhm.
So the only faith I'm having is my reasonable justification of do I have reasonable justification to think that there are potential natural reasons why this could happen? And that's the extent that of the weight that I put on that, for example. And John, I don't know if that echoes what you would think, but like my faith component, I have absolutely zero faith that anyone's going to solve it, and nothing about my life would change if tomorrow they were making life forms every Monday. They have a new batch of abiogenesis. Nothing about my view about God changes based on that.
Well, I would say the conclusion might not change. That would be a pretty big jump. I agree. But I guess, like I'm reading right now, Neil deGrasse, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. And he says in there, and I'm not trying to impeach you with his word, he says, within
Mhm.
a chemically rich liquid ocean, by a mechanism yet to be discovered, organic molecules transform to self-replicating life. And I mean, that in going back to Hebrew, the assured expectation of something to come. I mean, he states a fact here. And again, I know these aren't your words, so
Well, no,
I'm just,
but
I'm just giving you
but
a,
here's the thing about his process. What if I acknowledge that God was the unknown reason that happened?
well, or at least equally denote it, I suppose.
Well, no, no, but all I'm
I
saying
agree.
is like
You
so.
could make
But
a,
Neil didn't say it was a natural thing. He said by some unknown. He acknowledged what we have evidence for was that we have prebiotic stuff and we have postbiotic stuff, and and even if God did it, there was a mechanism by which God did it, right? Like the
Mhm. I agree. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
so so nothing about Neil's statement in any way makes says that that any of us are like putting any weight of what our lives. We don't make any of our life decisions based on
Mhm.
some notion that science will eventually solve origin of life.
No, but I
Yeah.
mean, I think there's statements of saying that it's fact, right? I mean, it's not as if he left some ambiguity to it. He says he doesn't know the
Right. No,
reason,
but
but he knows what happened. Mhm.
yeah, but again, do you question that at one point there was no life and at one point there is life?
Oh, no, I agree. I agree. But he says self-replicating molecules
Well, yeah,
from chemical
that's because
reactions. I think
we,
it's
we
the
we
chemical.
have evidence of. Well, I mean, we have evidence of various parts of abiogenesis, like all of the necessary components, like we've been able to show actually happen naturally. And so, like the parts, as far as I understand it, maybe Paul understands differently, but as far as I understand it, like we're missing certain sections of it, but we've got a pretty good, like a pretty clear picture of like how it would have happened in a certain way, but we can't state that we know that it happened that way. But the fact
Well,
is that we
I'd say
know that
that
it
there's
can
a
happen naturally.
no, I wouldn't go that far. I would say that the problem exists in we have to put the cart before the horse, and that's where Dawkins talks about the selfish gene. But then anyhow, there's all sorts
I'm
of,
not.
I would say that there's a sequencing problem with the DNA and all that, and what has to come before different
No,
parts of it.
but still, you
But in
understand that.
general,
But again, Neil deGrasse Tyson at no point said any of the things that are required. He just said there was we know that self-replicating molecules exist in a world without life, and we now have life. What are the dots that connect? Even if God did it, that
so
then God is the. Go ahead.
yeah, well, it's the part where he said the chemical part. That's right. But organic molecule, let's see, within the chemically rich liquid oceans,
So
molecules
let me.
transition to self-replicating life.
Right, right.
I, I
Let me ask this.
yeah.
Let me ask this real quick. Can you name a process that exists now for which the only explanation for said process is God?
The only explanation I can't do that I have things I feel, but I have no way to convey some argument that you would accept.
Well, I mean, no,
I
well,
don't.
it doesn't matter what. Like, I don't know why whether or not I would accept it but it is important. What I'm trying to get across to you is that if we take a look at the explanation for how life began here on Earth, what you're
Mhm.
proposing is that there's a distinction between either God did it or some natural process happened. And regardless of whether or not we know the full process, it's still going to be like a question between God did it, which to me in my mind just equates to magic, but either God did it or it was a natural process that happens naturally that we can explain. And if we don't have any examples whatsoever of a natural process being explained better by adding God to it, then why should we think that the beginning of life needed God in the first place?
Well, I think if I had to answer that question, I think one of the problems would be that I agree. There's a lot of Christians and other faiths out there that almost have a magic component to it, especially young earthers. I mean, I believe in evolution. I'm not a young earther, and I believe that there's a lot of natural explanations for why things happen. I believe that God put those natural explanations into the order in which they needed to happen. And so, uh,
Okay,
I think that,
okay, let's
in the
go with
process.
that.
Yeah.
Let's go with
Okay.
that. I'm assuming you have faith in God, right?
I do.
Okay. So you called in to argue against this whole idea of faith being a lack of evidence. And so you use faith, which is a non evidence based faith. So does that mean that this particular thing that you believe in is backed up by evidence, or is this the faith that doesn't have any evidence?
The evidence that I would say that I have for faith is based upon a lot of the scripture in combination with the how sensical the world
Well,
is around me. I know that's very generic,
Well,
but
I guess
I believe
I
that
was specifically sorry, I was specifically talking about how about your statement about God, establishing these natural processes and all that. What kind of evidence do you have to support your faith in God being the reason for those natural processes?
I would say that it comes down to the order of the processors and how well established they are and how the innate and the organic seem to be in concert with each other. And that seems unlikely to me to have occurred accidentally or without reason.
So you're saying that basic chemistry can only occur if you add a dash of magic to it.
No, I'm saying that if you really, and I don't have the math right here. I'm an architect, and you're an engineer. Are you structural engineer, by the way? Sure. Clear.
I'm a computer and software engineer.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. That the math, the probability of if I'm of math of all these things being in the order in which we perceive them is it seems like the probability itself is somewhat ridiculous, and so I do
I
subscribe to
feel
that
like you don't know how
more.
statistics works. If you're saying that, I feel like
Okay,
maybe you just don't understand statistics. I don't know. I know Paul shook his
okay.
head. Maybe I'm wrong about that assumption, but because that's just simply not how statistics works. Like if I have a set that has a trillion like items in it, and I have a point zero 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 like absurdly small percentage that I'm going to pull a specific thing out of it, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to pull that thing out of it. It just means that it's incredibly unlikely. And so I have never heard any scientists or any atheists or anybody say that, say something like, crap, I forgot where I was going with this. But my point is that nobody has ever said that life is highly likely, depending on how you contextualize it. We're not saying that life is incredibly likely. We're saying that life is unlikely to happen in the universe, considering how many places we know about that life doesn't exist. And the fact that life doesn't seem to exist really anywhere near us in the universe. It seems like life is hard to form, if it does form, which it more than likely does form naturally. But so we're saying that it's incredibly unlikely for life to form, which is the exact thing that the percentage describes. If it's highly unlikely that these things would come together in the way that they do, that means that we should expect to see life be very scarce in the universe, which is exactly what we experience. So, how does the percentage of all of these things coming together and falling in line like that, how is that an argument against a natural beginning to life?
Well, going back to the percentage, when you say you haven't heard, even Dawkins in his book talks about almost like a Drake-like equation related to the chance of life, and then he relates it to the number of planets and stars and systems we have out there to create some variable to explain how, to your point, how unlikely, but it is possible. The problem that I think you run into in the probability side is that you have to prove it happened once to be able to add anything but a zero times the probability. So you're basically running into your own dilemma because you have to conclude and show that can occur once, and it's not just the life. I mean, life is very
So
robust. I
let
agree,
me
but it's
let
the
me
innate elements of
if what wait, what would you say? Sorry, Paul had an eye movement.
it's there.
Life happened. So I feel like the fact that we're having this conversation demonstrated that life happened once.
Right.
No, but I mean, as it relates to accidentally or without a cause or not a cause, not the right word, but accidentally in the sense that it just spontaneously occurred for a set of natural reasons. You'd have to
So
demonstrate that
I
actually
feel
did
like
happen
in
without.
in my head, what happened when you described that was that, here's the earth and then poof, life happened immediately. As
Well,
if
no,
it
no,
didn't
I
like
know.
take a long time for it to develop.
Well, in a long time, I mean,
So right.
we're talking
Okay,
about
like
here. Imagine all the innate things. Imagine the magnetic fields required to protect us from the atmosphere. I mean, imagine all the natural systems of
well,
water.
right. So that just
Your
means
I
intuition
mean, you could go
just
on and on and on.
but John, you understand that this is your intuition, right? Because I like my intuition is that this absolutely has not only happened here, it's likely happened in other places I because my intuition is to look at the size of the galaxy and even the Drake equations and see like these should be even with which I do not accept all the weirdness that's in that, but even in that this seems to me life feels inevitable based on the size of the galaxy. That's my intuition. You're seeming to argue like you're looking at these numbers and saying your intuition is it's unlikely. But now we're just throwing intuition at each other in an entirely unhelpful way.
Well, I'm trying to answer it from the form you mentioned Romans 1:20 earlier, and I'm trying to answer it from the standpoint of a first century person on this earth having to answer that question of why it would be inexcusable. And so there is a bit of intuition, but I would say that intuition translates into layers of probability as it relates to like, I mean, starting from, the constants of the universe down to all the
Right.
innate
So
aspects that we need for life. I mean,
there you have to
there is a
demonstrate
lot
for
of
me
layers
like
there.
you have to demonstrate to me no one's demonstrated that the universe could be otherwise. Right? Like so again there's this notion that we are I don't know any cosmologists that posit that there ever was nothing. So there's not like
I know be
if there was something, that something has properties. And if that something has properties, we don't know that any of these others that are fine tuned could be otherwise. Now, maybe they could be, but it would be impossible for you to demonstrate given that the only universe we can observe is one. So I'm going to be like incredibly unimpressed by this notion that well the gravitational constant is this way. Well, it's like well could it have been otherwise? Maybe not. In which case, then it's like every universe that was going to pop up had this gravitational constant, right? Or strong weak
except
electrical force. S- Go ahead.
except I would say too though some of the multiverse theories. I mean those are generated from that problem, right? I mean a lot of that is related to the fact of trying to explain how it is
Right, because
that all these
because it is people's
properties.
intuition that this seems unlikely. But that's still
Yeah,
all that
there you
it
go.
is. Like the people. So, but
I agree.
you understand that my intuition is not that, and lots of people's intuitions aren't. So, like intuitions are a weird way to argue.
Well, it's not but it's not just intuition. I would say that there is, and I don't have it right in front of me, so obviously I don't have the book open in front of me. But I would say there are probability ratios that are statistical. To your point, statistical numbers that are quite problematic over the layering of all these things put together into a
like,
coherent
like,
theory, which
right. Okay,
again,
since
Anyway,
which is
since
exactly
we're
we're
on
why
track.
this multiverse and
si-
yeah, I
hold
agree.
on, since we're moving back to probability here, maybe we can recontextualize this. It's not like God kind of centered. There is in poker. Do you play poker?
I have. I don't play it a lot, but I have.
Okay. So there's this one hand called a royal flush, and that's when you get all the same suit from 10 to ace, right? And it's the best hand that
Mhm.
you can get in poker. and it's got a 0.000154% probability of being made in a hand of poker, right? So this translates to once out of every 600,000 for 600,000 for 649,740 is what it ends up like.
Mhm.
It occurs once in that many amount of time. So does that mean that it will never come up?
No, it'll come up.
Okay, when
Okay.
you quote me a percentage of like a probability of life developing naturally on its own, unless it is 0%, then it has a chance of developing naturally. And if you think about the number of chemical reactions that happen every second or happen, every year or whatever, like if you think the amount of chemical reactions that are happening, even in just one place, like on a primordial earth, what do you think the likelihood is, given the percentage that you've been quoting of life developing naturally, given that immense set, what's the likelihood of it happening once?
Right now, the scientific number is 0 because we can't
Is
prove
it?
it. I mean, we can't prove it happened. Yeah, because
What
we've been
source are you getting
trying
that
for a
from? Because
long
you've been
time and we
quoting
can't get it.
well, you've been quoting actual percentages, and you've never said that it's 0% likely. You said some incredibly small number percent likely, which means that
Well,
it's
I think that's in
incredibly
the most that's in
unlikely,
the mo
which is exactly what we're saying.
yeah. There's no question that the math on statistics gets a bit skewed because people add a likeliness to anything. I right? I mean, I
Okay,
think
okay.
even Dawkins
Now
even quotes some ridiculous
right, right.
example of
Okay,
that,
but now you're saying that there's a 0% chance of life developing naturally.
well, right
What's
now,
your
no, I
evidence
said
for that?
science no, I'm saying scientifically right now, there's a 0% chance that chemicals can turn into self-replicating molecules. 0. We have no evidence of it.
What is your
We've
evidence for
tried.
that? Well, or what's your source for that?
Well, I'd say Dawkins himself, but I'm sure there's another
Oh, does
professor.
Dawkins say somewhere that there's a 0% likelihood of life developing naturally? I kind of feel like that's antithetical to the biological work that Dawkins has actually written.
Well, Dennis Noble is another one right now that in fact, I'm reading his 2023 book. I would say that what they're saying is that there is no evidence. They agree that there is no evidence. They may put a statistical value on it, but right now, scientifically, if you were to just like if roles were reversed here, and you were the theist and I was the atheist, and we were talking about completely different things, you would say, well, there's zero evidence for this. There's zero evidence
I would
that
never say that.
self-replicating.
No.
Okay, okay,
I would
all
never.
right.
There's not
So,
zero
so
evidence
I
for
just mean there's
anything.
no scientific. Okay,
there,
zero. I
there's
keep
there's a lot of
qualifying it.
scientific
And
evidence
sometimes I
that
don't.
supports
Zero scientific.
abiogenesis, though.
Zero scientific. No, but
No, no.
there's zero scientific evidence that self-replicating life can come from chemicals. I'll just that's faulty.
I mean, I don't know where you're getting that from, but there's
Oh,
several like the Miller-Urey experiment shows how amino acids can be produced in a without any kind of like outside influence. So I mean, that's evidence of it. There's also scientific studies that show self-organizing, chemicals and stuff like that. So I mean, I'm not claiming to be an expert in
well,
this
like,
field or anything
yeah.
like that, but I do know enough about it that there are like we have the individual pieces that show that abiogenesis is likely to have happened naturally without the need for magic.
Well, going back to my original point, it's a cart before the horse problem right now. Yeah, there's some.
It's really
In
not.
fact, they use the term crystallize. It is because it's the self-replicating part. It's the DNA part. That's where the element.
No,
Right,
do
you
you
can keep
understand that
crystals to
self-replicating and
form chemicals.
wait. You understand that self-replicating and DNA are not synonymous, right?
No, you need the no, it is synonymous. In fact, you need the you need the DNA to replicate correctly, or it will fail. I mean,
Do you think DNA replicates
Dawkins
correctly
now.
now?
No, I'm
Do
saying
you think
the
that there are no
DNA.
replication errors in DNA now?
Do I think there are no replication errors? If there are, yeah, no, I don't think there's enough to
So
replicate the cell.
I would like for you to go research RNA because RNA is replicating, but it's not DNA. So
Okay.
I don't have, we don't have really John and I, you should definitely call in when Forrest or somebody's on, but there definitely is replicating, like those replicating chemical processes that scientists are calling replicating, that maybe if you are assuming that what Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying was that they go straight to DNA, then I get now understand what you're thinking the disconnect is. But all they were saying was replicating. And there are definitely proteins and RNA that we can in labs get to at least a replicating process. That's why they were so confidently saying we can get stuff to replicate. But no one, I'm hoping you weren't reading that anyone was saying that life jumped, that they went straight to DNA, because not the claim on the table. Yeah. And then, when it comes to all those other constants, again, you'd have to demonstrate that an alternate universe is even possible, for me to care about those numbers. But I wonder if we can wind this all back to faith. So I was actually saying, like, even
Mhm.
if we're showing abiogenesis in the lab every Monday, we're making new life forms every Monday. That's just the thing that we suddenly live in a world that people are doing that. I don't think Christianity would stop. And I don't think atheism
I
would
agree.
stop. Like, it's not a linchpin, because I know a lot of theists that would just say, well, now we've shown one possible way God did it. Like, that's all, and that's what just keeps happening, right? Like, so they used to think that thunder was caused by gods. Well, now we understand that it's not. But now, every Christian would say, well, yeah, that's how God makes thunder. Like, that's the natural process that we understand now. So it's
I think
not
it
the
would.
same.
I think it would affect the personalized aspect of God, right? I mean, there would be a little bit of a hit there. Like,
Why?
well, sort of thing.
I know Christians now who think that God absolutely wound up the singularity, whatever that means, in an exact precise way, and that actually shows better evidence of design, that he was able to wind up a singularity that would get that outcome he wanted, rather than constantly intervening. Like, that God, the
Mhm.
God who can do it in one shot, is actually the better God than the God who has to keep stepping in. Oh, well, now you're on water. I guess I should make you stand upright. Like, some people do think that God intervened with evolution at certain key steps, but there are definitely
Mhm.
theists who think that it was all one shot and God was smart enough to wind the clock in exactly the right way. So again, I don't honestly believe that it would affect even that personal nature, or even the
No,
specialness of it,
I mean,
right? Like,
even
even if we were
yeah, even Darwin was not an atheist, right? So I mean,
right, right.
he
So,
believed he
like,
had the
I
Cambrian
back
explosion
to
and all that.
our other calls, like, I don't think that answering these questions, no, answering these questions from science has never destroyed Christianity or any other religion before. So I don't know why this one would. And I also don't know why, weirdly, that you are wanting to, I want to rewind back to, like, why you were conflating that John and I are kind of in this place where it seems like maybe one day, like, that a natural process seems plausible, but that doesn't actually affect the theist question. So I don't understand why us kind of erring on the side of, well, it seems like God isn't required, is equivalent to what you were advocating for, which was that it's a virtue to live your life with certainty on a little gap there, because you're definitely putting forth this God as a certainty in your life, or at least you're living your life very much as if it's true,
Mhm.
that you're trying to equivocate those things. Do you see where I don't quite see that those are the same? Like, John and I are not in any way making any decision in any of our day based on whether or not abiogenesis was a natural or a theistic process.
Yeah, and I was using that more as it was more of a side argument related to a statement of faith, in the scientific world. But to my original call, obviously, it's the faith being the shared expectation, with evidence, as Hebrews 1:11 mentions. I was trying to defend against the idea that faith had to be.
Okay, so are you arguing that Christians who use faith in any kind of gap between evidence and conclusion, are you saying that all Christians or any theist who uses faith that way is using it wrong? Is that what we should say? if next time someone calls up and says, you know what, John called in on May 19th and he said that you're doing it wrong. Is that is that your position?
Well, I would say that someone's inside of or I just should say someone, a theist would be, it would be based on theological discussion, which starts from the premise that God exists versus the philosophical discussion of religion, right? I mean, so I would say that you're starting with the idea that God exists, and the faith is the assured expectation of the things that he promises. It's not necessarily supposed to be about faith that God exists. You're almost supposed to know that God exists, and faith is coming from the things that he promised, he said. So that's the unique
So
qualifier on
it,
faith I think I was trying to get across.
it sounds to me like you've got to first believe in God in order to have faith in God. Is that, maybe I was misunderstanding what you were describing
Yeah,
there?
no,
It
that's
sounds like
exactly
you've got to believe first and then faith comes later.
right. Faith used as Paul uses it isn't related to, you're not faith that God exists. That's not, I would say, a right use of faith. Faith that what he said will come true is the way that the scriptures talk about.
Y- you
Right.
understand that presuming that God exists with no evidence is what we're saying is blind faith.
I hear you. I understand that. But I'm saying that if you look at the Bible writers, they all come from the position that God exists. They're not questioning. There's not a lot of chapters in the Bible, pontificating whether or not there is a God or not, right? And it all starts from the source that he exists, and then goes from there.
Okay.
Okay. So it, it doesn't, I'm now actually more confused about what your call was supposed to be about, because you're sounding a little bit presuppositionalist almost, right? Right now you're willing to say, I absolutely beg the question that that you're placing your God there first. And you're also saying that the gospel writers did that. Um, a- is a Christian correct or incorrect? My question was going to be, is a Christian incorrect or by using faith that way? But it seems like you're just saying that when it comes down to it, that's what you're doing as well. Am I wrong? Are we wrong? Are we crazy?
Well, no, or maybe I didn't understand. I mean, or we're talking past each other, perhaps. But I called in specifically related to the idea that faith, there was no evidence required for faith, and my point is that biblically, evidence is tied in with the definition of what faith needs to be.
Okay,
But
but
the confusing part would
but you
be,
would agree that there are people in the world who use the word faith to say, I accept a conclusion that has no evidence. Like that there are just people walking
yes,
around
I do.
saying that faith is their
Yes,
reason. Okay. So, and I'm saying
I agree.
now, am I allowed to now say to everyone who calls in with that, every Christian say, no, John on May 19th called in and said that you're using faith wrong.
Well, I read
Am
the
I, are we
scripture
allowed to say
defines
that?
exactly what faith. Well, I just I'm not the authority here, but I'm saying that there's a scripture here that I read that is the definition that Paul used for faith.
Mhm.
So I guess, if as a qualifier to that, if the person believes that
Right.
what Paul wrote is true, then I suppose there would be evidence that they might be using faith incorrectly pursuant to his view.
Okay. So would you agree then that you just, if two people are using words, using the same word, but they're using different definitions of that word, that they're not actually talking about the same thing?
I think that it could get confusing as you use scripture in concert with the term faith, not using it correctly. But I agree that
No, I mean,
places
any word in
locally
general,
were
just any
using it.
word in the world.
Yeah.
Like, so let's say I am using the word red to indicate a color,
Mhm.
and you're using the word red to indicate that you looked at words and understood them in the past. Those are both,
Yeah, I would
we just
definitely
say
agree.
that, weirdly, that was maybe a bad example because they're spelled differently, but different words, there's different words you can conflate the meaning, right? Like that's just a weird
Right.
thing about language, but that ultimately the they're not describing the same thing. So when we are addressing someone like the caller William, who was dealing with people who absolutely were just saying that faith to me means X, means this blind faith with no evidence, we're justified then to point out that that is a bad epistemology, right? Like we don't have to reference them to
Yeah.
John on May 19th to saying, well, there's a different way to define that word. That's irrelevant because
Wait a minute.
they're expressing.
Okay,
Go ahead.
this would be more similar. Let's say we had a contract or a report or some paper, and it was using the word, and inside that paper or that contract, there's the definition of the word specifically noted, so that to avoid that confusion. I guess what I would say in turn, I'm referencing Hebrews 1:1 through 3, that specifically states what faith is, faith, and that should be the guidance or the point at which Christian, at least, should use the term because it explicitly
Okay. But
stated
this is
what
why
it
I'm
means.
saying we're not going out.
Mhm.
John and I as atheists aren't going out and telling people what their definition of faith should be. They call us,
Right.
they talk to us, and we say, what definition of faith do you use? And we will go by it. Notice that neither John or I on this call told you that you're using faith wrong. We're saying, hey,
Correct.
go ahead and define when you're talking about faith, what do you mean? But in the earlier call with William, the person was self-identifying faith as a whole different thing. So I don't know why
Mhm.
John and I are supposed to be the Christian police when a Christian is self-identifying using faith in one way, that it's our job to tell them that uh, they should be using faith a different way. It seems like this is an in-house thing that maybe the Christians should get together on and figure it out.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree with you. Everything you're saying is very
All
logical.
right.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah.
Because all we can do is when we ask someone what they mean by faith and they say, that means I don't need evidence to accept this. Well, then we just have to work with what they're giving us.
Nope, I agree. And keep in mind, I was looking for a reason to call in. I was just trying to find some reason.
Oh, well, perfect. Now,
Yeah,
so let me ask, did you enjoy this conversation?
I did a lot.
Did
Yeah, I did a lot.
Okay.
In
All
fact,
right.
in
Well, I
fact, I'll
hope that
probably
we
listen to it
were
again I'll listen to it again just to make sure that what I said was mostly right. Hopefully, I didn't say too many
okay.
things. So I'm sure
Well,
I did.
what I want you to do now is you go look up RNA and definitely call in.
Okay.
And if
Cool.
we were wrong about
Okay.
RNA, even if John and I aren't on, you can say, well, Paul and John said that RNA did this and they were wrong because X, Y, and Z. And I can't wait for that call. So please do that, especially
There you go.
if one of the scientists is, well, we have scientists on the channel who are very active. I'd love to hear that. And sorry, John, I monopolized the end of
Okay.
that one.
I mean,
Have a good night,
it's
guys.
fine.
I appreciate the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, John, for calling in.
Thank you. Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I got a rant mode.
No, that's fine. I went back and I looked at Hebrews 11:1 through 3. And I mean, there's a
Yep.
lot of different versions of it, but like, uh, I don't know. I don't know which version he was reading, but it doesn't seem like to me, it just reinforces the whole, faith without evidence thing.
So actually, no, you're right. We didn't let him. I jumped ahead because to my own Christian rationalization of this chapter, because
Hmm.
the way I rationalized as a Christian was yes, verse 1 says assurance of what we do not see, but then the whole rest of the chapter is basically a summary of the Old Testament.
Hmm.
And I think that if you want to be the most generous about saying, well, yes, you shouldn't read a single Bible verse, you should read passages, right? Because Bible verses didn't exist when they were writing this. I get why, as a Christian, you want to say, well, all these other verses rationalize, give examples of a different kind of faith than what is expressed in verse 1. So how do you reconcile that? To me, that's just one of these weird things. Like your book is broken because it's saying two things right side by side. So, but
Yeah. I don't know. Like I see, like apparently the KJV, NLT, CSV, NASB use proof and evidence, but the ESV uses conviction of things not seen, which I don't know if that's too much different than evidence, but it just
mm,
it's a I don't know. It seems like a weird hair to split on these things.